What's up, kinfolk, and welcome back here to another week on Guns and Butter with your favorite cousin, Kinda G. I hope everybody's had a great week and y'all are ready to get into this week's case. Now, this week's case brings me back to my old podcasting days. Like I've been podcasting for 10 years, right? But this one is actually good because, unlike a lot of the cases that I've been covering lately, the killer actually lives, okay? So I already know y'all are ready to hear this week's case. So go ahead, sit on down, get comfortable, grab your wine, your popcorn, and let's dive in.
That's what it's all about. Guns and butter, baby.
All right, now, family. So in this week's case, I'm going to be telling y'all about a young immigrant mother who met a successful older man. And he basically swept her off her feet and gave her that American dream that she'd always wanted. However, no marriage is perfect. And it just so happened that this newlywed young mother, who's supposed to be in the honeymoon phases of her new marriage, is actually suffocating in this marriage. And she's determined to get out of this marriage by any means necessary. Kelly Forbes was born on the island of Trinidad in 1979. And if you didn't already know, in Trinidad, they live raw. They live rough. And at the tender age of 19, Kelly had been assaulted at gunpoint. And after a few years, her boyfriend at the time got her pregnant and then left her to be a single mom. And then at the age of 24, she was raped. But by this time, Kelly had had enough of Trinidad, and she decided it was time to move to New York and give her daughter and herself a better life. So she packs up her stuff and she moves to New York. There, her brothers are there. I believe her two brothers and her dad already live there. So she just wanted to start fresh and give her daughter a better life. And it didn't take her long at all to catch her footing in the States. She became a medical assistant at a Brooklyn hospital, drawing blood, taking EKGs, and she was a really caring person. And it showed through her work because she really enjoyed her job. But it was said that it was her soft touch that caught the eyes of one of her patients, which later became her husband. Michael Forbes was a barbershop owner and a successful businessman. I seen somewhere that he had been to prison because of drugs or something like that. And then when he got out, he tried to do things the legit way and he opened up a barbershop, and that's where he got his success. And not only was he a barbershop owner, he was actually into real estate. And he owned a couple of properties out in Brooklyn. So he was a landlord. And I don't know if y'all know, I don't know at any point in time when New York wasn't expensive, but to own properties in New York, that's big. So I'm sure he was bringing in a pretty good profit renting out his properties. But Michael had come into the hospital to do a stress test. And Kelly was the one who was hooking him up to his IVs. And Michael was just smitten by her. You know, this is a young, foreign, just interesting, just something that's just fresh to his eyes. She had an accent, long, dark hair, brown skin, and Michael couldn't help himself. You know, he sees something he wants and he just got to go for it. So he was shooting every shot in the book. Needless to say, he was really infatuated by Kelly. So much so that he ended up leaving his number at the front desk for her, and her coworkers are like, "Oh my gosh, girl, give him a try. Just give it a shot." But this wasn't just an easy decision for her because Kelly was actually only 27 and Michael was 48. But Kelly was really mature for her age. She had to grow up really fast in Trinidad, and she was a single mom as well, so she knew how to handle herself. And all the while she was flattered by Michael's interest in her, the feelings weren't really mutual, and she had no real intentions of being in a relationship with him, and she let that be known up front. But y'all, Michael was a man that was not about to take no for an answer, and he was patient and he was persistent, okay? So he started to try to woo her. He would send her flowers several times a week. He would send her cards and try to court her. And he would send this stuff to her job. So her coworkers were like, girl, just give this man a chance. So finally, in September of 2006, Kelly agreed to go on a date with Michael. So after going out on this initial date with Michael, Kelly was pretty much like swept off of her feet. You know, she was given the American dream. She was given this romantic, very well off older man. He would send her flowers constantly to her job. He would take her to elaborate places. He would take her on trips, you know, just showing her a different side of life that she wasn't used to. He was pretty much like her Prince Charming, making her feel like a princess. And I don't know if this was probably love bombing or he was just really like infatuated and trying to keep her interested because, you know, she's only 27 years old. He's 48. So I don't know if he was trying to keep her interest or he was really falling for Kelly. But after only a month of dating, Michael was in love. So he proposed to her. And even with her telling him no that initial time, because she's like, we just met. You don't even really know me. Like, what do you like about me? Like, what has you so in love with me? What is it? And, you know, he just wasn't about to accept no for an answer. So he decided he was going to buy her love and he was going to buy her an even bigger diamond. So he decided to propose a second time. And by this time, Kelly is like, all right, okay, come on now. Okay, all right. Yes, yes, I'll marry you, Michael. What's the worst that can happen? I'll just give it a chance. In fact, the worst that can happen actually happened. So a year later in 2007, the two were married. They had a huge, gigantic Caribbean themed wedding. And Michael spared no expense trying to please his new wife. You know, whatever she wanted, he got it. And as far as the wedding videos, the two looked to be, you know, in love. They seemed to be happy. They were slow dancing, they were holding each other, looking into each other's eyes, smiling, and everything seemed okay. Kinda, sorta, you know, from the outside looking in. It's for a wedding, you know. But Michael's mom said that while she was at the wedding and all the Caribbean drums were playing and everything just seemed so perfect, all at the same time, it seemed like the Caribbean music, the Caribbean drums and the beats were like sacrificial music or something like that. Like it was very dramatic. And so it goes on. 2 weeks after this big Caribbean themed wedding, Michael actually kept good on all of his promises to Kelly. And he actually went ahead and surprised her with a huge split level ranch style waterfront mansion in Merrick, New York. And this was in an upscale neighborhood of Nassau County. So he really did his big one on this one. But Merrick was actually an hour away from Brooklyn, which is where Kelly's daughter was, and she was actually attending school, so she didn't want to just uproot her from school. Not only was her daughter attending school there, and that was just pretty much like home base, that's where Kelly's folks were. That's where her brother and her dad, and you know, where her comfort was. But to make matters even worse, Kelly didn't have no car. Michael was the only one that had a car, so she had to completely rely on him to get her to and from Brooklyn. Or the alternative was her getting on a train ride and taking an hour long commute to get to and from Brooklyn, just to see her child and to see her people. So she would later go on to say that because of this, Michael completely isolated her from her entire life that she had pretty much grown to know. But y'all, 2 weeks after getting married, Kelly and Michael's relationship and their marriage was already on the rocks. By this time, Kelly had already packed up her and her daughter and they had moved back to Brooklyn with her brother. She was tired of commuting. She wasn't about to keep asking Michael to take her to and from, and she wasn't about to keep taking this nasty train to and from. So she just moved back to Brooklyn. And she would occasionally spend the night with her husband, but that hour-long drive to see this man that she really wasn't all that interested in just really wasn't working for her. And of course, this caused a lot of friction and a lot of fighting and a lot of frustration between Kelly and Michael's already very fragile and questionable marriage. because she wasn't spending enough time with him. She wasn't assuring him enough. So, 1 month after getting married, Michael actually had a heart attack in the middle of the night. And to make things worse for him, Kelly wasn't even there to help him because she was in Brooklyn. So he had to call his mom for help. And after having to call 911, call his mom, and just rely on everybody but the person that you're married to while you're having a literal heart attack, Michael was kind of starting to see things a little bit clearly. However, Kelly finally showed up at the hospital, and all of his frustration and his anger kind of went out the window for a second. But she didn't stay long because she had to get back to her Brooklyn life. She, hey, how you doing? All right, you alive? All right, well, I gotta go. She wasn't affectionate. She didn't show him any type of love, and his family seen that. So they looking at him like, I know you fucking lying. What's going on? This is your new wife. You're supposed to be in love. And not only was she not there for you while you had a heart attack, she just left you high and dry while you had to recover as well. So, what's really going on? So, instead of taking his family's advice and noticing the red flags and realizing that his new little young wife that he thought was a come up really ain't shit, instead of leaving her, he bought her a brand new Mercedes Benz so that she can drive to and from Brooklyn much easier. And so that she can spend more time with him at home because she has a car. I mean, you don't have to take the train anymore. You don't have to keep asking me for rides. You can come and go as you please. But that means that I'm going to get to see you more, right? So after Kelly and her daughter moved out of the Merrick house, it was pretty evident that this marriage just was not meant to be. Because on top of Kelly not really being in love or in like with her husband, her daughter really wasn't comfortable with being in the home with him either. And it's not like he was doing anything to her, but Kelly just wanted to make her child happy, wanted to make her child comfortable. So, her child was still trying to adjust to this new life, being in a different place outside of where she was used to, being in Brooklyn with Kelly's family. And when she got to Michael's house, it was just an adjustment. So her daughter would have a hard time falling asleep. And by this time, her daughter was about 7 years old. And, she's old enough to recognize what's going on. But Kelly would always fall asleep with her. She would get uncomfortable sleeping, or she would, have a tough time falling asleep. So Kelly was that parent that would rub your back to sleep, read you a story, and then end up falling asleep in the bed with you. And Michael just could not stand this. So this would be another thing that they would fight about, because this is his wife. She belonged in the bed with him. Why are you constantly sleeping in the bed with your daughter? Like, this is just another thing that shows me that you really don't want to be with me. So on this particular night, the confrontation just went a little bit too far. Because just before 9 a.m. on November 21st, 2007, Kelly had called police telling the dispatcher that she needed help because her husband Michael wasn't breathing. When police arrived to the home, they found Michael unconscious on the floor of the upstairs bedroom. Now, they did administer CPR, but there was still no sign of life. They ended up transporting him to the local hospital, where he was pronounced dead an hour later. So, back at the home and the scene of the crime, detectives are asking Kelly what happened. So she goes on to tell them that Michael attacked her with an extension cord, but she had to fight back. And somehow, instead of him strangling her, she was able to fight back and strangle him with the extension cord instead. All the while, her 7-year-old daughter slept peacefully in the next room. Now, Kelly was 5'5" and about 150 pounds. And Michael, on the other hand, was 6'1", about 250. So detectives are thinking, how in the hell does this woman's story even make sense? Like, This woman got to be a black belt martial artist or a self defense something. It's just not adding up that she was able to get out of this situation the way she explained it. So Kelly proceeds to tell detectives that Michael was physically abusive to her and he had shaken her and hit her in the head previously. And no, she didn't report any of the abuse because Michael would always come back with apologies and gifts and she would forgive him. However, on the night of the attack, Michael was apparently pissed off yet again because Kelly was giving all of her love and attention to her daughter. And they started arguing, but Kelly didn't want her daughter to see them arguing, so she's like, let me put my daughter to sleep first and then we can finish our conversation. So Kelly supposedly did that. She puts her daughter to sleep, and then instead of putting her daughter to sleep and then coming back out so that she and Michael can finish their conversation, she ends up falling asleep in the bed with her daughter. So by the time she wakes up, just a little while later, she says, she went back to the bedroom and Michael was still awake and he was waiting for her. But he was pissed and he was sick of her excuses and sick of her lying to him. So he tells her, no, you can't sleep in here tonight. And I'm sure she was like, okay, cool, because I wasn't trying to sleep in here anyways. So she goes ahead, she grabs a little pillow, she grabs a blanket, and she heads out to sleep on the couch in the other room. And Michael just wasn't going for it. So he supposedly wakes her up, they continue arguing, and she says that she told Michael that if he was going to continue to make her life miserable, that she was just going to leave. But Michael just laughs at her. Girl, please, you can never leave me. And they ended up just separating for the night. So Kelly says that it wasn't until the morning when Michael woke her up trying to strangle her with the extension cord. And she says that she rolled off the couch and then Michael grabbed her by the throat and just started squeezing. Then she says that her ears started ringing and everything just went fuzzy. She grabbed the other end of the extension cord and wrapped it around his neck. And then she just blacked out. The next thing she knew, Michael was on the ground and he wasn't breathing. So she realized that he might be dead. She called 911 and she tried to get help for her husband. Now, this all sounds fine and dandy, but in real time, Kelly didn't actually call 911 first. She first called her dad, then her brother, and then one of her good friends by the name of Jeremy Bryant. And lo and behold, Jeremy was the one that told her that she needed to call 911. So detectives are like, thank you, Miss Kelly, for this, very insightful and detailed account of what happened. But they did go ahead and ask her, did you make any noise during the attack? Did you try to call for help or scream or do anything? And she's like, no, I didn't want to wake my daughter. So they're like, okay, well, let's go ahead and get some pictures of your neck and get some pictures of your body, just to see if there's any evidence of the attack. And y'all, this woman had no bruising around her neck. There was no scratches, no markings. And yeah, we're not trying to victim blame here, but there's just no evidence that supports this story that you're telling, little lady. And being that you're the only one that is alive and that survived this attack, we're just not really believing it. Now, she did have a mark on her wrist, like a small bruise on her wrist, but, they just weren't really going for it. On the other hand, Michael had several bruises around his neck, and his neck had been squeezed so hard that the cartilage had been broken. And like I told y'all earlier, Michael wasn't a small man. So the fact that she was able to escape this whole ordeal with only, a couple of tiny bruises, her clothes were still intact, they weren't torn. On top of that, she didn't have like a bloody nose or a black eye, and just, nothing was really supporting her story. And not only that, but the room that she claimed the attack took place in was still very much intact. Everything was in place, still very neat and tidy. No lamps were broken, no pictures were knocked off the wall, no furniture was moved. And it just wasn't adding up that a struggle took place in this room. And although Kelly was claiming self defense, the question was it actually? Girl, hell no. Detectives did not believe her, and she was arrested on murder charges. All right, y'all. So, y'all remember Kelly's friend Jeremy Bryan. This was the third man and the third person that Kelly had called after she had strangled or, gotten into this altercation with Michael. So, turns out that Jeremy wasn't just a friend of Kelly, he was actually her lover. And the two had met on a dating website where her name was Sexy Trini 78. And of course, they had started dating while she was in a marriage or whatever with Michael. And after chatting online for a few months, Kelly and Jeremy finally decided to meet up in October. And it didn't take long for the two of them to make things physical. So, being that this person was probably seeing Kelly, without clothes on and stuff like that, seeing her up close and personal, the prosecutor in this case asked Jeremy if he had ever seen any signs of bruises or abuse on Kelly's body. And he says no. In fact, she had texted him that night at 8:19 on November 21st after she had strangled Michael, saying, quote, "No, I did it." And although the state and Michael's family was convinced that Kelly was behind his murder, a grand jury didn't believe that there was enough evidence to charge her with second-degree murder. So, she wasn't indicted for those charges, and she was ultimately released. But the prosecutors wanted to make her pay for something, even if it wasn't, second-degree murder. So, they decided to charge her with first-degree manslaughter. And in August of 2008, 29-year-old Kelly Forbes was convicted for manslaughter, and she was sentenced to 21 years in prison for strangling Michael Forbes. Now, of course, she still claims self-defense, but during her sentencing, Michael's 15-year-old daughter came forward and she said, "Why did you do this to my father? He was my best friend. One day you'll be able to see your daughter again, but my father will still be dead." Kelly went on to tell the judge, "He pursued me with flowers, gifts, and trips. He promised me and my daughter a better life. He told me he wanted us to settle down and build a family together. I believed him, Your Honor. I thought Michael was a changed man. While he courted me, he promised me the world. I encouraged him to stop smoking and drinking. I encouraged him to eat better and start exercising. I never asked him for anything. All I wanted was a safe, stable home for my daughter. Michael promised to give her one. He tried to isolate me from my family and my friends. He didn't want me to work. He didn't want me to spend time with my daughter. He began to abuse me emotionally, mentally, and physically. He told me not to see my brothers because he had enemies in Brooklyn. I survived by the grace of God and His mercy. He grabbed me and tried to put the cord around me a second time. I was afraid for my life and my daughter's life. Know in my heart I'm alive today because God gave me the strength to fight Michael off. I pray for forgiveness. I hope that in time the Forbes family will understand that I acted in self-defense. I pray that you show mercy and understanding when you sentence me." And after it was all said and done, like I said, she was sentenced to 21 years. Well, if Kelly ain't already out already, she will be getting out here pretty soon. But y'all, that's the end of this week's case. But this just shows y'all, stop trying to be sugar babies and sugar daddies and everybody is not in it for love and everybody is not for you. So stop forcing it. Don't buy love. And I'll see y'all back here, same place, same time next week.
That's what it's all about. Guns